Aloha mai kākou o keia o Tiani, ke kahi mea haʻi moʻolelo ma Niuhelewai nei. Aloha everyone, Tiani here, and it is my privilege to share some moʻolelo here at Niuhelewai about the areas surrounding our campus here in Kapālama. Honolulu Community College is located on the island of Oahu, and prior to Kamehameha uniting the islands, there were 4 separate kingdoms, Oahu definitely being its own. And our island is further divided into moku districts, and the district that we're located in is called Kona. And Kona means leeward in Hawaiian, but on the island of Oahu, the district of Kona runs from Moanalua to Kuli'o'o, which is kind of seen as Honolulu town today. We have 2 mountain ranges here. Ko'olau is the name of our mountain range. So you'll see Ko'olau on each island because Ko'olau just means windward in Hawaiian. But only on this island do we have a mountain range named Ko'olau. And on the opposite end of the island, on the west side, we have the Waianae Mountains. Another term that some might be familiar with is ahupua. Ahupua is a popular term today for land divisions. But another term that should be more pertinent and should be applied specifically for Oahu land divisions is ka'anani'au. And so we are in the land division of Kapālama. Kapālama is situated between 2 valleys, between Kalihi and Nu'uanu. Behind us, there is a ridge in the back that runs between Kalihi and Nu'uanu, and it is called Keanakamano or Keanamano Ridge. Kapālama begins further Makai along that same ridge line. The name of our wind here in this area is called Olauniu, and it refers to the stabbing movement of the leaves of the coconut trees as the wind blows. It also has some other kolohe metaphors. But we receive rains from nearby. From Kalihi, we receive the ua po'olipilipi and the haupe'epe'e. From Nu'uanu, we receive the makalaukoa and the pua hiohio and the malailua. And from Honolulu, we receive the ua kukalahale. The naming of Kapālama has a few different stories. The grandmother of Lepeamoa is named Kapālama. Lepeamoa is a famous female chicken kupua who was raised here, and so I'll tell you more about her in a little bit. Without the ka in front of it, just Pālama. Pālama is a name that was often used to describe this area, especially by people who lived in this area. But Kapālama, or the Pālama, specifically refers to a famous site that was located here in this area, of which the enclosure was made of lama wood. Lama wood is a type of Hawaiian ebony. And these kinds of lama enclosures made of lama were designated for the arranged matings amongst the highest ranking ali'i, as their goal was to produce higher ranking children, which are sometimes referred to as ni'aupio chiefs. Malo writes about this practice amongst the ali'i in order to preserve their rank and their status. And he says the highest chiefs were the result of arrangements made within the same family of close relation. If this mating at the Pālama resulted in a pregnant chiefess, everyone celebrated the conception of this child that was likened to a god due to their high-ranking status. On the opposite end, we have Reverend William Ellis, who writes about his disgust of ni'aupio amongst the ali'i. He says, among the higher ranks, marriage seems to be conducted on principles of political expediency with a view to strengthen alliances and family influence. And among the reigning family, brothers and sisters marry. He goes on about an arranged mating between Oahu and Maui, chief and chiefess, and how the chiefly council has agreed to this and supports this match. And he's kind of surprised, but the reason they give him is pretty much that there's nobody else high enough ranking for them. He says that they ought not to form any alliances with inferiors, as it was desirable that the supreme rank they held should descend to their posterity. And so the resulting children often retained a higher rank and status than that of their parents. There are many storied places here in Nu'uanu, starting at that back ridge, Keanamano or Keanakamano. It comes down into the Kalihi Valley side of Kapālama and creates Keanakamano Valley, which is today where the entrance is the front gate to Kamehameha schools. But this is this area was famous for the shark Aumakua, who used to swim up through the system of underground lava tubes that would swim up into this area to be fed and cared for by the family members that lived here, and then would swim back down to the ocean. And those caves were collapsed in the early 1900s. Many of you are familiar with Aleva or Aleva Heights, the site where Kamehameha Schools is located today, upper campus. But this area was also famous for a holua slide. While translating David Malo, Nathaniel Emerson includes a note describing it as being 18 feet wide so that two sleds could race at the same time. Malo, in his writings, he describes this practice. No ka he'e holua. He says, o ka he'e holua ke kahi hana le'alea nui ia e na ali'i a me na kanaka. He hana pili vai vai no ka make make ka lehulehu. It was one of the things that was very much enjoyed, both the chiefs and the commoners, as the majority was interested in gambling or betting. Kenneth Emery later on goes looking for the slide in 1952 with some students, but finds that the slope where it's supposed to be has been recently plowed or bulldozed. Further down below Aleva, we have Kaivi'ula, the plains of Kaivi'ula below, which is the current site of Bishop Museum and where the freeway area is that runs across to Farrington. But remember that this was the early site of Kamehameha Schools. It wasn't up until the 1930s that they started to build the upper campus and then move the girls' campus up there. And then it's not until much later that the boys' campus moves there as well. Coming down further, we also have Niuhelewai. Niuhelewai was the name of one of the two main streams here in this area. The other was Kapālama. And there was just such an abundance of vai, or fresh water, in this area. It was covered in lo'i taro patches, and lokoi'a, or fish ponds. And you can see that on the early maps here. And all the waterways were eventually combined into Kapālama Canal as we see it today. When you repeat the word vai, vai means wealthy or rich or treasured or value. And Hawaiians understood that if you had a lot of vai, that you were vai. And so it makes sense to have a water guardian in this area, which would be a mo'o, a water aumakua. And so the mo'o were oftentimes guardians for fish ponds and other bodies of waters. And here in this area specifically, we had Haumea. You may be very familiar with her daughter, Pele, who lives and is very active on Hawaii Island. But Haumea is the mother of Pele and all of her siblings, who all do this awesome things. And she gives birth from all the different parts of her body. But there's an interesting story about Haumea living here, specifically in Niuhelewai, where she is defeated by a male named Ka'ulu. And Ka'ulu actually uses some fishing nets, some koko, as well as some special nets that he goes to get from Makali'i in order to defeat her. And it's interesting because Ka'ulu, the term Ka'ulu, refers to growth, to an increase to increasing food supply, to posterity, and all of these things, which are all connected to Haumea. And also the ulu, or the breadfruit tree, is also a kinolao, or another body form of hers that we see. And so because this land was highly valued, it made sense that the royal family settled here. Kamehameha, after he conquered Oahu, he actually farmed here in Niuhelewai and in Kapālama, and his descendants eventually lived here. His granddaughter Ke'elikolani accumulated most of his lands, and she lived here, and she left it to her cousin Pauahi, who established Kamehameha Schools. We have Ka'iulani School nearby, which is named for Princess Ka'iulani. Our mo'i wahine Lili'uokalani also had a home near in Kapālama called Moʻolelo. And our Hawaiian patriot Joseph Navahi also lived nearby in this area. And so we see the evidence of this today. In Ka Moʻolelo, Hawaii, David Malo describes ka hakamoa. O ka hakamoa ke kahi mea makemake nui ia e na ali'i. That this was something that was very liked by the chiefs, as they enjoyed betting and gambling on the cockfights. And so, unlike most other places in the world, where someone might say, "What? You chicken?" Over here, the chicken never would represent fear, but instead represents someone who was fearless, someone who was an expert, or very adept at something, especially someone who was skilled at fighting. Although the chicken is not native to Polynesia, it is found throughout the Pacific because our ancestors sailed across the Pacific over to South America and returned back with the chicken. And so when we look at one of our early cosmogonics, the Kumulipo, our ancestors knew this. And in the Kumulipo, the chicken is not born in the dark with all the other aumakua, all the other plants and animals. Instead, the chicken comes much later, during the time of light on the back of Wakea, during a time period, and accompanied with all the many navigational stars that are needed when you're traveling across the Pacific. And so the chicken is often an aumakua to those who travel using the stars. This particular chicken in this story is born supernatural. Some of you might have heard of another kupua who was born as a chicken egg, which is Maui. Maui in the Kumulipo is born to Hina after she puts on the malo of Akalana. And so later on, when he goes to ask her, who's my father? She says, you're Maui Akamalo, you're Maui of the malo. It's the malo that is your parent. Again, Maui was born as a chicken egg. And look at all the awesome things that he accomplished. This story of Lepeamoa was published in the Hawaiian language newspaper Kanupepa Ku'oko'a in 1869 on September 18th. The title is He Ka'au no Kau'ilani, A Tale of Kau'ilani. And we'll just be looking at one part of a larger story that is named for Lepeamoa's brother, Kau'ilani, who is raised on Kauai. Samuela Kapohu presents this version of this story, and he doesn't claim authorship of this like many other Hawaiians who told mo'olelo, because this was a mo'olelo that had been handed down from generation to generation, and he really was just telling this version of it, and he didn't claim to know everything. And it was very common in the introduction or the preface to explain this, to say something like, hey, maybe this version isn't the same as what you, the reader, have heard in your family or where you come from. Or maybe this is a different version from what you heard. Maybe some things are left out and some other things are added in. But perhaps there is no one living today that knows all of it. This is also recognized in the Olelo no Eau, a ole pau ka'ike I ka halau ho'okahi. Not all knowledge is learned in one school. Yeah, so our kupuna recognized that there were multiple schools of knowledge and different ways of doing things, especially when it came to different places, and not one was correct and the other one was wrong. And so like most Hawaiian mo'olelo, we start this mo'olelo with the genealogy. Eia na kupuna. Here are the grandparents. Here are the ancestors. And it starts with Manokalani Po, chief of Kauai, and comes down to the parents, Kauhau and Keahua, who are descendants of the ali'i from Oahu and Kauai. And they are living on Kauai, Kauai Kini, which is located in Waialua. And Kauhau births a child, but when they look instead, he hua moa kekeki, the child is a chicken egg instead. And at one point, Keahua, her kane, even suggests tossing the egg out. E ki ola keia keki. But one of the grandparents, Lua Kaikapu, she requests for the egg to care for it temporarily until the Oahu grandparents arrive. The story then turns to Oahu, where Kapālama and Niuhelewai are living, and Kapālama knows that her daughter has birthed a chicken egg, this special child, and she tells her kane, we should go over there and go fetch our grandchild and take care of this grandchild for us. I ola keia mau iwi, so that the bones might live. And what she's talking about was this understanding of the significance of the relationship between grandparents and grandchildren in Hawaiian culture. Children oftentimes spent a lot of time with their grandparents while parents were busy. And there was much learning and teaching and so much things that was passed on through this time. And the expectation was also that this relationship was one of reciprocity, and that later on when the grandparents were older, that the children would then in return take care of them. So because she knows she has a special grandchild, they prepare to travel to Kauai to fetch the egg. They board a canoe named Pohaku o Kauai out at Waianae at Kaena. And they head over to Kauai. They go up Mauka to Kawaikini and tell the parents, hey, we came for the egg. That's why we came all the way along this far away, all the way over here across this ocean. And they're told that it's in the hand of Lua Kaikapu, who's been caring for the egg since then. And the egg is brought to Kapālama, and she wraps it in this special kapa that she has, that's reserved for her newborn grandchild, a newborn chiefly child. And so they return to Oahu and settled in Kapālama. Kapālama turns to Honouliuli and says, hey, build a house for our grandchild. Go build a hale. And after the house is built, it says, he maikai a nani mauli, that it is well made and that it is beautiful. They didn't build a cage or a shed or a box and stick the chicken egg in it. They built a hale that was appropriate for their chiefly grandchild. And after the house was done, she said, hey, go make imu, go prep some food. And so as he's getting all the things ready and the food is finishing up being made, she turns over and uakiko, it had hatched. Yeah. And what did? He kino moa. There was a chicken sitting there in the place of the egg. And the chicken is described as having all the colors of the rainbow within its feathers. He lehulehu wale na wai ho'olu ano e ma kona kino holo o ko a apuni. He mea e kananilua ole. He mau hulu ano e he nui wale. Describing her beauty that is unmatched, and how all the light is like shining out from her feathers and even from like around her, like as if she has a glow. And the grandparents saw that she had multiple chicken bodies within their grandchild. O ke la ano kino, ke ia ano kino. Yeah, including the moa lava, the moa ulahiva, the moa pule pule, moa ele ele, moa nene, and all the moa, all the different kinds of chickens. One day while Lepea Moa is inside her hale and her grandparents outside, she changes. She changes into a kanaka, specifically, she changes into a human, specifically a kaikamahine, a young girl. It says, Loli ke kino, a lilo I kou na kanaka. He kaikamahine uia nani hoi, just a beautiful child, a beautiful young girl. Her skin is compared to all the rainbows that we see shining over the waters, as well as those that are shining in the heavens. And as a kaikamahine, remember, as a chicken, she had all the rainbow colored feathers. But now as a kaikamahine, the light is seen to radiate from within her, and there's just this glow about her. And so at one point she calls out, "E, auhea o lua, komo mai hoi paha I loko." She calls out to the two of them, come inside. And they were pu'iwa, they were surprised when they heard a voice, because nobody lived there except them and their chicken grandchild. And after contemplating on it and in slightly confused and wonderment, Kapālama realizes it's their grandchild, and she says, "Hey, that's our grandchild, Uakua Kanaka, that has turned into a human, and she's calling us to come inside and see." And the story, or that issue, ends there with Aole I Pau. And so ends the first issue of He Ka'au no Kauilani. And every issue after that ended the same way. Aole I Pau, Aole I Pau. It is not finished. And even the last issue of that story in that newspaper would also end with Aole I Pau. Because remember that the story was not complete just by this one person that was telling the story. So the story will shift to more of a focus on Kauilani and being raised on Kauai and all of the different feats that he accomplishes. And eventually he comes over to Oahu, and he later on will use his sister to help Kakuhi Hewa, the ruling chief, defeat his brother-in-law Maui Nui, who has a supernatural chicken named Ka'auhelemoa. And because Lepe'amoa is such a skilled fighter and has all the different kinds of chicken bodies, and also all the different colors of the rainbow within her that represents all the different skills she has in fighting. And so she's able to defeat Ka'auhelemoa, and also Kauilani, he conceals her early on so that no one can see all of the colors and the shining and the glows that's coming out of her. And Kauilani conceals her early on so that everyone else cannot see her awesomeness. And because she's the underdog, no one bets on her, and therefore the win is very big. Aole I Pau.